What happens when a black woman worth $14 billion is told she doesn't belong on her own private yacht? The Mediterranean sun glittered off pristine waters, while security cameras captured every word. Within 2 minutes, her phone would send a message that would sink 38 cruise lines and rewrite the entire maritime industry. This is the story of how one moment of arrogance cost the world's largest shipping empire everything they thought they owned. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The harbor at Monaco sparkled like scattered diamonds under the afternoon sun. Luxury yachts lined the marina in perfect rows, their gleaming hulls reflecting the azure water and limestone cliffs that rose majestically behind the port. The air carried the scent of sea salt mixed with expensive cologne and the subtle aroma of grilled seafood from waterfront restaurants where champagne flutes clinked against the soundtrack of designer heels on polished teak decks. Dr. Savannah Brooks stepped onto the dock at berth 47, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. At 39, she possessed the quiet authority of someone who had built empires from boardroom negotiations and calculated risks. She wore a tailored white linen suit that moved with Mediterranean breezes, her natural hair styled in an elegant twist that caught the sunlight. Diamond studs adorned her ears, understated yet unmistakably valuable. Her leather handbag contained documents that could shift global markets with a single signature. Behind her walked Marcus Chen, her chief financial officer, and Isabella Rodriguez, her head of maritime acquisitions. Both carried briefcases filled with contracts representing the largest cruise industry consolidation in maritime history. They had flown from New York specifically for this meeting, where $14 billion in capital would reshape ocean travel forever. The yacht before them stretched 400 feet from bow to stern, its name Celestial Dynasty painted in elegant script across the gleaming white hull. 5 decks rose like a floating palace, each level adorned with crystal windows and polished chrome fixtures that caught the light like prisms. The vessel represented more than luxury transportation. It served as the floating headquarters for the most powerful cruise line consortium on Earth. At the gangway stood Trevor Hamilton, the harbor master for this exclusive section of the marina. His uniform bore the insignia of Monaco Maritime Authority, pressed to military precision. His clipboard held the guest list for today's summit, though his attention focused more on appearances than documentation. When wealthy passengers approached, his smile appeared genuine and welcoming. When service staff passed by, his expression hardened into bureaucratic indifference. The previous guest, a silver-haired man in a navy blazer, had strolled past without question. Hamilton barely glanced at his invitation before waving him aboard with a deferential nod. This man's skin was pale, his accent clearly European, and his confidence suggested generational wealth. No verification required. Savannah approached the checkpoint with her invitation extended. The document bore the official seal of Meridian Cruise Holdings, embossed in gold foil with security watermarks. Her name appeared in elegant calligraphy alongside the designation Principal Investor and Board Chair. The invitation specified her authority to access all decks and participate in executive discussions regarding the proposed merger. Hamilton's smile evaporated the moment he saw her. His eyes narrowed as they traveled from her face to her clothing to the invitation in her hand. He made no move to accept the document. "Staff entrance is around the back," he announced, his voice carrying across the dock. Several other guests turned to observe the interaction. The nearby conversations quieted as tension rippled through the afternoon air. Savannah extended the invitation closer. "This grants me access to the executive meeting," she replied, her tone even and professional. Hamilton crossed his arms, deliberately avoiding eye contact with the document. "We've had issues with people trying to sneak aboard," he continued, his voice growing louder. "Catering staff, entertainment personnel, housekeeping. You'll need to use the service entrance and check in with your supervisor." Marcus stepped forward, his own invitation ready. "Sir, Dr. Brooks is the primary investor in today's merger discussions." Hamilton ignored him entirely, his gaze fixed on Savannah with obvious suspicion. The other guests began pulling out their phones, sensing drama unfolding. A woman in a Hermes scarf whispered to her companion while discreetly angling her camera. A couple from the adjacent yacht paused their conversation to watch. The ambient noise faded into focused attention. "Please examine my invitation," Savannah said, maintaining her composure. "This clearly states my credentials and authorization." Hamilton finally snatched the document, holding it at arm's length as though it might contaminate his uniform. "System shows this berth is reserved for Meridian executives only," he declared after a cursory glance. "You'll need proper clearance from the actual decision-makers before I can allow access." The word "actual" hung in the air like a weapon. Phones began recording more openly as the confrontation escalated. Isabella stepped forward, her own invitation ready. But Hamilton raised his hand to stop her. "One at a time," he commanded. "Let's get this sorted out properly." Savannah reached into her handbag and withdrew her phone. The device was unremarkable in appearance, a standard business model with a reinforced case. What made it extraordinary was its contents. Encrypted channels connected her directly to treasury departments of 3 major banks. Her contact list included the personal numbers of finance ministers from 12 countries. And most importantly, it held authorization codes for the largest maritime investment fund in global history. Her thumb moved across the screen with practiced precision. She opened a secure application known to only a handful of financial institutions worldwide. The interface was stark, designed for function rather than aesthetics. A simple menu displayed various account controls, each capable of moving billions of dollars with minimal effort. She selected the option labeled Emergency Authorization Protocols. A new screen appeared, requesting confirmation for immediate fund freezing across all active maritime investments. It waited for her biometric verification and a 2-word confirmation code. Hamilton continued his performance for the gathering crowd. "Maritime security requires proper protocols," he explained to the phones recording him. "We can't just let anyone claim they belong in executive areas." The other guests murmured among themselves. Some nodded in apparent agreement with the harbor master's stance. Others frowned, sensing something amiss in the interaction. The dynamic felt familiar yet wrong, like a play performed with the wrong actors in the wrong roles. Savannah's finger hovered over the confirmation button. The screen displayed a warning in red text. "This action will immediately freeze $14.2 billion across 127 accounts in 38 maritime organizations. Proceed only if certain of intent to terminate all current negotiations." She looked up from her phone, meeting Hamilton's eyes directly. He stood with arms crossed, chin raised in defiance, completely unaware that his next words would determine the fate of the world's largest cruise industry merger. "Security will escort you to the proper entrance," he announced, gesturing toward 2 uniformed guards who had appeared at his signal. "This dock is for legitimate passengers only." The word legitimate struck like lightning. Phones captured the moment from multiple angles as Savannah's expression remained perfectly calm. Her breathing stayed steady, her posture unchanged, but something shifted in the atmosphere around her. She returned her attention to the phone screen and pressed her thumb against the biometric scanner. The device verified her identity with a soft chime. The confirmation field awaited her input. Without hesitation, she typed 2 words, "Execute immediately." The command transmitted instantly through encrypted channels to banking centers in New York, London, Hong Kong, and Geneva. Within seconds, algorithms began freezing assets, halting wire transfers, and suspending credit facilities across the global cruise industry. The largest maritime investment in modern history vanished from active status in the time it took Hamilton to signal the security guards. Savannah slipped the phone back into her handbag and adjusted her suit jacket. To the observers, she had simply sent a text message. To the financial institutions receiving her commands, she had just triggered the most devastating corporate earthquake in maritime history. The guards approached with uncertain expressions. They had expected to escort a confused service worker to the proper entrance. Instead, they faced a woman whose composure suggested she belonged exactly where she stood. Her presence carried an authority that made their task suddenly complicated. "Ma'am," one guard began hesitantly, "we'll need you to follow us to the staff area." Savannah nodded once, acknowledging the instruction without agreeing to comply. The distinction was subtle but significant. She had heard their words. She had not accepted their authority. The crowd of onlookers grew larger as word spread through the marina.
Passengers from neighboring yachts gathered along the dock, drawn by the unusual scene. Their phones captured every moment, every gesture, every word exchanged between the impeccably dressed woman and the increasingly flustered harbor master. Hamilton's confidence began to waver as he noticed the attention his actions were receiving. The recording devices made him nervous, though he couldn't articulate why. His position carried legitimate authority over marina access. His protocols were clearly established. Yet something about this particular confrontation felt different, more consequential than a simple security matter. Above them, the Celestial Dynasty's crew watched from the yacht's upper decks. Senior executives had gathered for the merger announcement, expecting to celebrate the completion of their industry consolidation. Instead, they observed a harbor master preventing their primary investor from boarding the vessel that would soon belong partially to her. None of them yet realized that the money funding their celebration had already disappeared. The account showing $14.2 billion in available capital would soon display zero balances. The merger agreements they had spent months negotiating would become worthless paper within the hour. Savannah stood perfectly still, surrounded by guards, phones, and growing crowds of spectators. She had not raised her voice, had not threatened legal action, had not demanded to speak with supervisors. She had simply made a phone call. The Mediterranean sun continued to sparkle off the water, casting dancing reflections across the luxury yachts. The afternoon breeze still carried the sense of sea and sophistication. But beneath the surface beauty, tectonic plates had shifted. The foundation of the cruise industry had cracked with two words typed into a secure application.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Hamilton checked his watch, eager to resolve the situation and return to his normal duties. The gathered crowd made him uncomfortable, their attention focused on his every move. He gestured more forcefully toward the service entrance, hoping to end the spectacle quickly. What he didn't understand was that the spectacle had only begun. In banking centers across the globe, emergency protocols were activated. Risk management teams were receiving urgent notifications. Senior executives were being pulled from meetings to address catastrophic fund freezes. The woman standing calmly before him had just demonstrated the difference between authority and power. Hamilton held authority over the marina. Savannah wielded power over the industry itself. As cameras continued recording and crowds continued gathering, the initial confrontation was evolving into something far more significant. The harbor master who had dismissed her as illegitimate would soon discover exactly how legitimate her influence truly was. The game had changed. The stakes had escalated beyond a simple boarding dispute, and the consequences were already spreading like ripples across an ocean that would never be the same. The security guards hesitated at the edge of their authority. They had been trained to handle drunk tourists, aggressive paparazzi, and occasional gatecrashers attempting to board luxury vessels. They had never encountered a situation quite like this one. The woman before them radiated a calm confidence that made their task feel increasingly complicated with each passing moment. Officer Daniel Reeves, the senior guard, cleared his throat and gestured toward the service walkway that ran along the marina's eastern edge. "Ma'am, if you could please follow me to the staff processing area, we can get this resolved quickly." Savannah remained motionless, her gaze fixed on the Celestial Dynasty's main deck where executives had begun gathering near the railing. They watched the unfolding scene with expressions ranging from curiosity to growing concern. Several held drinks that had been served to celebrate the merger announcement, though the celebration was beginning to feel premature. Marcus Chen stepped closer to his colleague, lowering his voice. "Should I call the legal team? This is clearly discrimination. We have documentation proving your authority here." Isabella Rodriguez checked her own phone, scrolling through messages from their New York office. "The merger team is asking for updates. The signing ceremony was scheduled to begin 20 minutes ago. Savannah shook her head slightly, a gesture so subtle that only her closest associates noticed. She preferred to handle this herself, in her own way, using methods that would prove far more effective than legal threats or bureaucratic appeals. Hamilton's radio crackled with static before a voice emerged from the speaker. "This is Captain Morrison from the Celestial Dynasty. What's the delay with the Brooks party? They're expected on deck immediately." Hamilton pressed the radio to his mouth, his voice tight with authority. "Sir, we have a situation with unauthorized personnel attempting to access the executive areas. I'm handling it according to protocol." The response came back sharp and clear. "Brooks's party has full authorization. Send them up immediately." Hamilton's face flushed as he absorbed the contradiction between his assumptions and the captain's direct orders. The gathered crowd sensed his sudden discomfort, phones continuing to capture every moment of his visible confusion. "Sir, he replied into the radio. "The individuals in question don't appear to match the expected profile for executive-level guests. I was following standard security procedures to verify their legitimacy." The radio remained silent for several seconds before Captain Morrison's voice returned, colder and more clipped than before. "Mr. Hamilton, Dr. Savannah Brooks is the primary investor in today's merger. She controls more capital than the entire net worth of this vessel. Send her party to the main deck immediately." The words hit the dock like a physical force. Several onlookers gasped audibly. Phones tilted closer to capture Hamilton's reaction as the full weight of his mistake became apparent. The woman he had dismissed as service staff controlled the very meeting taking place above them. Hamilton's hand trembled slightly as he lowered the radio. His eyes darted between Savannah and the growing crowd of witnesses, searching for a way to salvage his authority without admitting the magnitude of his error. "Dr. Brooks," he began, his voice lacking its earlier conviction, "there seems to have been a misunderstanding about your role here today." Savannah's expression remained unchanged. She had not spoken since her initial attempt to present her invitation. Her silence carried more weight than any argument could have provided. The contrast between her composure and Hamilton's visible discomfort created a powerful dynamic that the recording devices captured perfectly. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in Manhattan, emergency protocols were activating in the marble corridors of Meridian Financial Center. Senior analysts stared at computer screens displaying unprecedented fund movements. Red warning indicators flashed across monitoring systems as automated alerts triggered throughout the building. Patricia Kellerman, the chief risk officer for Global Maritime Investments, burst into the executive conference room where the board of directors had been reviewing quarterly reports. Her face was pale, her usual professional composure replaced by barely controlled panic. "We have a critical situation. The Brooks account has executed emergency protocols. $14.2 billion in active maritime investments have been frozen across all platforms." Board members looked up from their documents with expressions of confusion and growing alarm. The Brooks account represented their largest single investor, the foundation upon which their entire cruise industry consolidation strategy was built. Chairman Robert Ashford set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "Explain the circumstances. Why would Dr. Brooks trigger emergency protocols during an active merger negotiation?" Patricia consulted her tablet, reading from urgent reports flooding in from their European operations. "The freeze originated from Monaco approximately 18 minutes ago. Our Mediterranean team reports some kind of incident at the harbor where the signing ceremony was scheduled to take place." The room erupted into urgent conversations as board members reached for their phones, demanding immediate contact with their Monaco representatives. The magnitude of the financial freeze was beginning to sink in. Without the Brooks capital, their carefully orchestrated industry takeover would collapse entirely. Back at the marina, Savannah finally broke her silence. The words she chose were measured and deliberate, designed to cut through the chaos without escalating the emotional temperature of the confrontation. "Mr. Hamilton, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the dock. "You made an assumption about who belongs in executive spaces. You acted on that assumption without examining evidence that contradicted your initial judgment. Your protocols failed because they were based on appearances rather than credentials." The phones captured every word, transforming her statement into content that would soon spread far beyond the Monaco Marina. Her calm delivery made the message more powerful than any display of anger could have achieved. Hamilton attempted to respond, but Savannah continued speaking, her tone remaining professional and controlled. "This incident reflects broader patterns in how authority is exercised and how assumptions shape treatment of individuals. Your maritime security procedures need fundamental revision if they allow personal bias to override documented authorization." The crowd had grown larger as word spread through the marina about the confrontation involving a major investor. Passengers from multiple yachts had gathered to observe, their phones creating a semicircle of recording devices around the central drama. Isabella noticed additional security personnel approaching from the main marina office. Senior staff members were emerging from various vessels, drawn by radio communications about the incident. The situation was expanding beyond a simple boarding dispute into a maritime community event. Captain Morrison appeared at the yacht's railing, his uniform indicating his authority over the vessel. His expression barely contained frustration as he observed the continued delay in resolving what should have been a routine guest boarding. "Dr. Brooks," he called down, "please accept our sincere apologies for this confusion. You and your team are welcome aboard immediately. We're prepared to begin the ceremony as soon as you're comfortable proceeding." Savannah looked up at the captain, acknowledging his words with a slight nod, but she made no move toward the gangway. Her stillness communicated something that would soon become clear to everyone present. Marcus checked his phone, noting the timestamp on the message his boss had sent 18 minutes earlier. He understood the sequence of events, even if the others didn't. The financial earthquake had already begun, triggered by the simple act of dismissal they had all witnessed. The executives on the yacht's deck began showing signs of agitation. Several were making urgent phone calls, their conversations becoming increasingly animated as they learned about fund freezes affecting their organizations. The cruise industry consolidation that had taken months to arrange was now effectively suspended with 2 words typed into a secure application. The irony was not lost on her. Hamilton's attempt to deny her access to a meeting about her own investment had resulted in the elimination of that investment entirely. His bias had cost the industry billions of dollars and destroyed the largest maritime merger in modern history. She slipped the phone back into her handbag and finally took a step forward, not toward the yacht, but toward the growing crowd of witnesses. Her movement drew every camera in her direction as she prepared to make a statement that would transform the incident from a local marina dispute into international news. The Mediterranean sun had shifted lower in the sky, casting longer shadows across the dock. The afternoon breeze continued to carry the sounds of water against hulls and conversations from adjacent vessels. But the atmosphere had changed fundamentally. What began as a routine merger celebration had become something entirely different. Savannah stood at the center of the gathering, phones pointed in her direction, waiting for her next words. She had demonstrated that true power didn't need to announce itself through shouting or threats. Sometimes the most devastating response was the quietest one. The harbor master who had questioned her legitimacy was about to discover exactly how legitimate her influence truly was. The executives who had planned to use her money to consolidate their industry were about to learn that their plans had been canceled with a simple phone message. The game had changed completely. The woman they had kept waiting for was the same woman who controlled their financial future. And that future had just become much more uncertain than anyone on the dock could have imagined. The first video went live while Savannah still stood on the Monaco dock. A teenage influencer named Ashley Chin, visiting the marina with her family's yacht, had captured the entire confrontation from beginning to end. Her finger hovered over the upload button for only a moment before she added a caption that would define the narrative. Harbor Master tells Black CEO she belongs with the staff. 2 minutes later, she freezes $14 billion and destroys the cruise industry. The video launched onto TikTok at exactly 3:47 p.m. Mediterranean time. Within 6 minutes, it had crossed 50,000 views. By the 10-minute mark, the engagement metrics were breaking platform algorithms. Comments flooded in faster than moderation systems could process them. She didn't even raise her voice. That's power. This is why I record everything now. Who is she, and how do I invest in her next move? Meanwhile, on Instagram, a different angle emerged from Rebecca Martinez, a lifestyle blogger who had been documenting Monaco's luxury scene. Her followers were accustomed to yacht tours and designer shopping content, but this footage was different. The contrast between Savannah's composed dignity and Hamilton's visible discomfort created compelling visual storytelling that transcended typical social media content. The Instagram post gained traction through the luxury travel community first, then expanded into business and finance circles as users began sharing across platforms. The hashtag MonacoGate started trending within 30 minutes, joined quickly by yacht drama and billion-dollar response. Twitter exploded with business journalists and finance experts who recognized the unprecedented nature of the situation. Financial reporter Sarah Kim posted a thread that would eventually reach 2 million impressions. Thread: what we're witnessing in Monaco isn't just discrimination, it's the fastest corporate demolition in maritime history. Dr. Savannah Brooks just froze $14.2 billion in cruise industry investments because a harbor master assumed she belonged with the staff. This is systemic bias meeting systemic consequences. The thread continued with detailed analysis of the financial implications, complete with screenshots of market alerts and banking notifications that were beginning to surface across professional networks. Each tweet in the sequence gained thousands of retweets, pulling the story into mainstream business media attention. LinkedIn became an unexpected battleground for professional discourse about the incident. Corporate executives shared the videos with commentary ranging from supportive to defensive. A post from former Carnival Cruise Lines executive Michael Thompson sparked heated debate. In 30 years of maritime business, I've never seen anything like this. One woman just held the entire industry accountable for bias that we've ignored for decades. The question isn't whether her response was proportional. The question is why it took this long for someone with real power to demand dignity. The post generated over 15,000 comments within hours, creating professional discussions about discrimination in luxury service industries that had previously been confined to private conversations. Facebook groups dedicated to travel experiences became unexpected hubs for sharing personal stories. The Monaco incident triggered thousands of users to share their own encounters with prejudicial treatment at hotels, restaurants, and transportation services. A group called Luxury Travel While Black grew from 1,200 members to 40,000 in a single afternoon.
YouTube content creators scrambled to produce reaction videos and analysis pieces. Business channels pivoted from planned content to emergency uploads about the breaking financial crisis. Travel vloggers shared their own experiences with discriminatory treatment at luxury destinations. The story was feeding itself, growing across every platform simultaneously. The speed of viral spread created a phenomenon that social media experts would later study as a case example of organic content amplification. Unlike manufactured viral moments, this story had authentic emotional resonance across multiple demographics and interest categories. In Los Angeles, entertainment lawyer Janet Foster was preparing for a client meeting when her phone buzzed with notifications from multiple platforms. Her assistant had flagged the Monaco videos as relevant to ongoing discussions about discrimination in luxury service industries. "This is exactly what we've been talking about," Janet posted to her 100,000 Twitter followers. The only difference is that this woman had the financial power to make her response felt immediately. How many times has this happened to people without billions to freeze? Her post was retweeted by celebrities, activists, and business leaders, expanding the conversation beyond the original incident into broader discussions about economic inequality and access to recourse. Meanwhile, mainstream media outlets were scrambling to verify details and secure exclusive interviews. CNN's breaking news alert went out at 4:23 p.m. local time. Developing, Black investor freezes billions in cruise industry funds after harbor discrimination in Monaco. The network immediately deployed a correspondent to the marina, though by that time the crowd of observers had grown too large for effective reporting. CNBC interrupted regular programming with a special report on the financial implications. Markets were beginning to react as news of the fund freeze spread through trading networks. Cruise line stocks started declining as investors processed the potential impact of losing their largest funding source. The BBC World Service picked up the story for international audiences, framing it within broader discussions about discrimination in European luxury tourism. The report interviewed economists about the precedent of using financial leverage to address social issues. Back at the marina, the crowd had tripled in size. Tourists, yacht crew members, and marina staff gathered around the scene with phones extended. The original confrontation had evolved into something resembling a press conference, though no official statements had been made. Local Monaco police arrived to manage crowd control, though they seemed uncertain about the appropriate response to a situation that was part discrimination incident, part financial crisis, and part social media phenomenon. French television crews began arriving as the story gained international attention. The contrast between Monaco's reputation as a playground for the wealthy and the discriminatory treatment of a black billionaire created irresistible narrative tension for European media outlets. Social media analytics companies later estimated that content related to the Monaco incident was being shared at a rate of over 10,000 posts per minute across all platforms during peak viral hours. The story had achieved what marketing experts call total platform saturation. WhatsApp groups among Black professionals and entrepreneurs exploded with discussions about the incident. Voice messages were shared, analyzing Savannah's strategic approach and debating the effectiveness of economic leverage versus legal action. Reddit communities dedicated to justice stories, corporate drama, and financial news all featured the Monaco incident on their front pages simultaneously. The r/justice served subreddit saw its highest traffic day in platform history as users shared and discussed the videos. International news agencies were translating and distributing the story globally. Japanese business networks covered the incident as an example of ESG investing principles in action. Middle Eastern financial media analyzed the implications for sovereign wealth funds and luxury tourism investments. The story was mutating as it spread, with each platform and community adding its own interpretive layer. TikTok focused on the emotional satisfaction of watching discrimination receive immediate consequences. LinkedIn emphasized the business implications and professional development lessons. Twitter facilitated real-time debate about proportionality and justice. Celebrity endorsements began amplifying the reach even further. When Viola Davis, actress and entrepreneur, shared the original TikTok video with the comment, "Every Black woman knows this feeling. Today, one of us had the power to do something about it." Her 40 million followers drove another massive surge in engagement. The Monaco yacht story was no longer contained within social media platforms. Traditional news cycles were being disrupted as editors realized they were dealing with a story that was simultaneously about discrimination, financial markets, social justice, and international business relations.
By early evening Monaco time, the incident had generated over 200 million combined views across all platforms. The hashtags associated with the story were trending in over 30 countries. News organizations were dispatching international correspondents to Monaco for follow-up coverage. The viral explosion had transformed a harbor dispute into a global conversation about power, dignity, and economic justice. The woman who had been told she didn't belong in executive spaces had become the center of international attention, all because someone had recorded the moment when quiet dignity met systemic bias. The internet had amplified her 2-minute response into a worldwide phenomenon that would reshape conversations about discrimination in luxury industries for years to come. The cruise industry executives watching their stock prices fall were beginning to understand that viral content moves faster than corporate damage control, and economic consequences spread as quickly as social media posts. What started as one woman refusing to accept dismissive treatment had become a global case study in the intersection of social media, financial power, and social justice. The explosion was just beginning. The first tremor hit Royal Caribbean's Miami headquarters at 10:47 a.m. Eastern Time. Chief Financial Officer Amanda Patterson was reviewing quarterly projections when her computer screen suddenly filled with red alert notifications. Every system monitoring their Mediterranean investment portfolios was flashing critical warnings simultaneously. Her hands froze over her keyboard as she absorbed the numbers. Meridian Capital, their largest funding partner for the European expansion, showed zero available balance across all active accounts. The $2.8 billion that had been earmarked for fleet modernization had simply vanished from the system. She reached for her secure phone line, dialing the emergency contact for Meridian's risk management department. The call went to voicemail immediately, which never happened during trading hours. Her second call, to the head of maritime investments at Goldman Sachs, connected but provided no answers. "We're seeing unprecedented movement in the Brooks accounts," the Goldman representative explained, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Every maritime investment tied to her portfolio has been frozen simultaneously. We've never seen anything like this scale of coordinated withdrawal." Her assistant burst through her office door without knocking, a breach of protocol that indicated genuine emergency. "The news departments are calling. They're asking about fund freezes related to some incident in Monaco. Do you know anything about Dr. Savannah Brooks?" The name hit Amanda like cold water. Brooks Capital controlled more cruise industry financing than any other single entity. Her investment decisions could make or break entire shipping lines. If she had frozen her accounts, the implications extended far beyond Royal Caribbean. "Get me the CEO on the line immediately," Amanda ordered. "Cancel all his meetings. We have a Category 5 financial hurricane approaching." Similar scenes were unfolding simultaneously across 37 other cruise industry headquarters. At Norwegian Cruise Line's offices in Seattle, executives stared at computer screens showing impossible numbers. Their primary credit facility, backed by Brooks Capital guarantees, had been suspended without warning or explanation.
Carnival Corporation's London offices received emergency calls from their banking partners in Geneva. The credit lines supporting their newest ships had been pulled, leaving them vulnerable to margin calls that could exceed their liquid reserves. MSC Cruises' Italian headquarters convened an emergency board meeting as their Swiss financing partners reported total communication blackout from their American investment backing. The planned acquisition of 3 competitor lines had suddenly become financially impossible. At Disney Cruise Lines, the corporate crisis team assembled in their Burbank conference room. The executive assistant to the entertainment giant's cruise division had spent the morning fielding calls from financial journalists asking about their exposure to Brooks Capital investments. Within 2 hours of the Monaco incident, 38 cruise companies faced simultaneous financial crises. The interconnected nature of modern maritime financing meant that Savannah's fund freeze had triggered cascading failures across the entire industry. The stock market opened in New York with immediate carnage in the cruise sector. Royal Caribbean dropped 18% in the first hour of trading. Norwegian fell 22%. Carnival stock price entered free fall as algorithmic trading systems detected the coordinated financing freeze and automatically triggered massive sell orders. On the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, traders who specialized in leisure and hospitality stocks watched their screens in stunned silence. The maritime transportation sector was experiencing the fastest coordinated collapse in modern financial history. CNBC's morning anchors abandoned their planned programming to provide continuous coverage of what they were calling the cruise industry crisis. Market analysts struggled to explain the sudden synchronized failure of the sector's largest funding source. We're looking at what appears to be coordinated withdrawal of capital from every major cruise line simultaneously, explained maritime industry specialist Dr. Jennifer Walsh during a live television interview. This level of investment coordination suggests either massive computer failure or deliberate strategic action by a single major investor. The anchor pressed for more specific analysis. Dr. Walsh, our preliminary research suggests this traces back to Brooks Capital. Can you explain who controls that level of maritime investment authority? Dr. Walsh paused, consulting her notes before responding. Brooks Capital is essentially Dr. Savannah Brooks. She's not just an investor, she's become the central nervous system of cruise industry financing. If she's pulled her backing, these companies don't just lose money, they lose the fundamental credit structure that allows them to operate. Meanwhile, in corporate boardrooms across the industry, emergency meetings convened with board members dialing in from around the world. The nature of the crisis was unprecedented. Companies that had been competitors for decades suddenly faced identical existential threats. At Princess Cruises' California headquarters, the board of directors gathered around a conference table laden with red folders marked confidential. Each folder contained the same devastating analysis. Without Brooks Capital backing, their operational credit would be exhausted within 90 days. Chairman of the board William Chen addressed the room with uncharacteristic gravity. Ladies and gentlemen, we are looking at potential bankruptcy proceedings unless we can restore our primary financing relationship immediately. The question is no longer about growth or expansion. The question is survival. Similar conversations were occurring simultaneously in Miami, Seattle, London, Rome, and dozens of other cities where cruise industry leadership was processing the scale of their coordinated financial catastrophe. The interconnected nature of the crisis became apparent as analysts began mapping the full scope of Brooks Capital's maritime investments. She hadn't simply funded individual companies, she had become the cornerstone investor for industry-wide consolidation, fleet modernization, port development, and environmental compliance initiatives. Her fund freeze hadn't just affected cruise lines directly. Shipyards in Germany and South Korea that depended on cruise industry orders faced immediate contract cancellations. Port cities that had invested in infrastructure to accommodate larger vessels found their expansion projects suddenly unfunded. The ripple effects extended into employment markets as cruise lines began announcing hiring freezes and considering layoffs. Travel agencies that specialized in cruise bookings watched their stock prices plummet as investors anticipated reduced consumer demand. Insurance companies that provided coverage for maritime operations found themselves exposed to unprecedented claims as cruise lines struggled to maintain operational compliance without adequate financing. By afternoon, the cruise industry's collective market capitalization had declined by over $40 billion. Financial news networks were comparing the event to the 2008 banking crisis, though the speed and coordination of this collapse was unlike anything in modern economic history. International markets reacted with their own waves of maritime stock declines. European shipping companies fell in sympathy with their American counterparts. Asian shipbuilding stocks declined as analysts predicted reduced demand for new cruise vessels. The human cost was becoming apparent as well. Cruise line employees, from entry-level service workers to senior executives, faced immediate uncertainty about their employment security.
The industry that employed over 1 million people globally had been destabilized by a single investor's decision. In corporate communications departments, teams worked frantically to craft public statements that could explain the crisis without admitting the level of vulnerability their companies faced. The challenge was communicating reassurance while acknowledging the unprecedented nature of their financial predicament. Some companies attempted to downplay their dependence on Brooks Capital, only to have financial journalists quickly expose the actual extent of their exposure through public filing analysis. The attempted spin only made their situations appear more desperate. Others chose transparency, acknowledging the crisis while emphasizing their commitment to finding alternative financing. These statements were generally received more positively by markets, though they still reflected the industry's fundamental dependence on a single investor's decisions. The Federal Reserve issued a statement monitoring the situation for potential systemic financial risks. While the cruise industry crisis appeared contained to maritime transportation, the speed and coordination of the collapse raised concerns about similar vulnerabilities in other economic sectors. International banking regulators began coordinating oversight as the crisis affected maritime financing across multiple countries and currencies. The global nature of cruise operations meant that Savannah's fund freeze had created international financial implications beyond the scope of any single nation's economic oversight. By market close, the cruise industry had experienced the worst single-day financial performance in its modern history. The woman who had been told she didn't belong in executive spaces had demonstrated exactly how much the executive spaces depended on her continued participation. The corporate earthquake was complete. 38 cruise companies faced existential financial crises because a harbor master made assumptions about who belonged where. The industry that had dismissed her was now entirely at her mercy, waiting to learn whether she would allow them to survive their own arrogance.
The story jumped continents at the speed of fiber optic cables. Within hours of the corporate earthquake shaking cruise industry headquarters, international media outlets were framing the Monaco incident within their own cultural context and economic perspectives. In Tokyo, the Nikkei Financial Network led their evening broadcast with analysis of how the cruise industry collapse would affect Japanese shipbuilding companies. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and Kawasaki Heavy Industries had received immediate contract cancellations worth over 3 billion yen as cruise lines suspended all new vessel orders.
The Japanese coverage focused heavily on the precision and efficiency of Savannah's response. Business culture commentator Hiroshi Tanaka explained to viewers that her strategy demonstrated what they called iki ni suru, accomplishing everything in one decisive action. The concept resonated deeply with audiences who appreciated strategic thinking and economic leverage. European perspectives differed significantly from Asian coverage. In London, the BBC World Service emphasized the discriminatory treatment Savannah had experienced, contextualizing it within broader discussions about racism in European luxury tourism. Their investigation revealed similar incidents at exclusive hotels, restaurants, and clubs across the continent. The Guardian published a comprehensive analysis titled The Monaco Moment, When Discrimination Meets Economic Reality. The piece included interviews with Black professionals who described facing prejudicial treatment at European luxury destinations, many sharing experiences that mirrored Savannah's encounter with assumptions about their legitimacy in elite spaces. German business publication Handelsblatt focused on the systemic risk implications for European banking. Several major German financial institutions held significant positions in cruise industry debt, making them vulnerable to the cascading effects of the Brooks Capital withdrawal. The analysis raised concerns about interconnected global financial systems and single points of failure. French media coverage took a different approach entirely. Le Figaro published an investigative piece examining Monaco's reputation as a tax haven for wealthy individuals and the potential hypocrisy of a luxury destination that fails to provide dignity to its wealthiest visitors.
The article sparked national conversation about France's relationship with its prestigious principality neighbor. In Italian coverage, where many cruise ships are registered and operated, La Gazzetta dello Sport unusually covered the story as economic news rather than entertainment. The potential job losses in Italian ports and the impact on Mediterranean tourism created direct relevance for their readership. Middle Eastern coverage emphasized Savannah's strategic patience and long-term thinking. Al Jazeera Business profiled her investment philosophy and examined how sovereign wealth funds might apply similar pressure tactics to address social issues. The coverage positioned her actions as a model for using economic leverage to advance social justice objectives. African media outlets celebrated the story as validation of Black excellence on the global stage. South African publication Business Day ran a front-page story titled "When African Excellence Commands Global Respect," positioning Savannah as representative of the continent's growing economic influence. Nigerian financial newspaper This Day published a detailed analysis of how African investors were increasingly using economic power to address discriminatory treatment in international business settings. The story became a symbol of changing global power dynamics. In Brazil, the story resonated within discussions about racial discrimination in luxury tourism. O Globo published investigations revealing similar treatment of Black Brazilian tourists at international destinations, using the Monaco incident as a catalyst for broader examination of travel industry bias. Social media platforms saw the emergence of region-specific hashtags and conversations. In India, the hashtag Dignity Has No Color trended as users shared experiences of discriminatory treatment based on appearance or perceived social status. The Monaco story provided a framework for discussing class and regional bias within Indian society. Chinese social media platforms adapted the story for domestic audiences, focusing on the economic strategy rather than racial aspects. Weibo users analyzed Savannah's approach as an example of soft power projection and strategic patience, concepts that resonated with Chinese business philosophy. The story evolved differently across various international business communities. In Singapore, the financial hub's professionals focused on the speed and efficiency of global fund transfers, using the incident to discuss the interconnected nature of international finance. Hong Kong business networks examined the regulatory implications, questioning whether single investors should have such concentrated influence over entire industries. The discussions reflected broader concerns about financial system stability in an interconnected global economy. Dubai's business community, accustomed to luxury tourism and international finance, engaged with the story as a case study in customer service excellence. Several luxury hospitality companies immediately announced policy reviews to prevent similar incidents at their properties. Australian media coverage emphasized the environmental angle, noting that cruise industry instability could affect planned environmental compliance initiatives. The Sydney Morning Herald published an analysis of how the financial crisis might delay adoption of cleaner technologies in maritime transportation. Canadian coverage focused on employment implications for Canadian ports and cruise tourism infrastructure. The collapse of cruise industry financing threatens summer employment for thousands of seasonal workers in coastal communities. International law firms began publishing white papers analyzing the legal implications of using economic leverage to address discrimination. The precedent raised questions about investor responsibilities, corporate governance, and the intersection of social justice with fiduciary duty. Academic institutions worldwide incorporated the Monaco incident into business school curricula as a case study in crisis management, social responsibility, and strategic thinking. Harvard Business School announced plans for a detailed case study examining both Savannah's strategy and the cruise industry's response. The World Economic Forum issued a statement acknowledging the incident as an example of stakeholder capitalism in action, where investors consider social and environmental factors alongside financial returns.
The organization announced plans to examine similar strategies for addressing systemic discrimination. International tourism organizations began reviewing their policies and training programs to prevent similar incidents. The World Tourism Organization published guidelines for luxury service providers on dignity and respect in customer interactions. Banking regulatory bodies across multiple countries initiated reviews of single investor concentration risks. The speed with which Savannah's decision had destabilized an entire industry raised concerns about systemic vulnerabilities in international finance. The International Maritime Organization began examining whether industry consolidation around single funding sources created unacceptable risks for global shipping. The cruise industry crisis demonstrated how individual decisions could affect international transportation networks. Human rights organizations globally embraced the story as an example of economic justice in action. Amnesty International published an analysis of how economic leverage could be used to address discrimination in various industries and regions. The story's international resonance created pressure for similar accountability in other luxury industries. Hotels, airlines, and high-end retailers began reviewing their customer service training and discrimination prevention policies. International stock exchanges experienced coordinated volatility as investors reassessed the risk profiles of companies dependent on concentrated funding sources. The Monaco incident had created a new category of investment risk that analysts were scrambling to quantify. The global conversation had transformed from a viral social media moment into serious examination of economic power, social justice, and international business practices. Savannah's 2-minute response to discrimination had sparked worldwide discussions about dignity, respect, and accountability that would continue for years. The woman who had been told she didn't belong in an executive space had become the center of international conversations about who holds real power in the global economy and how that power should be exercised. The reckoning was no longer limited to the cruise industry or even the maritime sector. It had become a global examination of how economic influence intersects with social responsibility.
The world was watching Monaco, waiting to see what would happen next in a story that had already rewritten the rules of corporate accountability and international business relations. The transformation began in corporate boardrooms, where panic had settled into grim determination. Cruise industry executives faced a stark reality. Their survival depended on meeting conditions they had never imagined having to accept. Dr. Savannah Brooks held their future in her hands, and she was prepared to rewrite the entire industry's approach to customer dignity. At Royal Caribbean's emergency board meeting in Miami, Chairman David Morrison presented terms that would have been unthinkable 72 hours earlier. The conditions for restoring Brooks Capital funding required fundamental restructuring of how the company approached customer service, staff training, and accountability. The Dignity Charter, as it became known, mandated that every customer interaction be recorded and reviewed for bias indicators. Staff members would undergo quarterly assessments on respectful service delivery. Most significantly, executive compensation would be directly tied to dignity metrics, creating financial incentives for leadership to maintain high standards throughout their organizations. Board member Elizabeth Harper raised the obvious concern. These requirements essentially place our entire operational culture under external oversight. We're talking about surrendering management autonomy to satisfy one investor's social agenda. Morrison's response reflected the new reality they faced, that one investor controls $14 billion of our operating capital. Without her backing, we don't have a company to manage autonomously. Similar conversations occurred across the industry as companies grappled with the choice between transformation and extinction. Norwegian Cruise Line's board spent 18 hours debating whether to accept oversight conditions that included passenger advocacy representatives on their customer service review panels. The most revolutionary requirement involved independent monitoring systems. Brooks Capital demanded real-time reporting of discrimination complaints with automatic escalation protocols that bypassed traditional corporate hierarchy.
Customer service representatives would have direct access to executive leadership when dignity violations occurred. Carnival Corporation initially attempted to negotiate less stringent terms, proposing voluntary compliance and internal monitoring. Their counterproposal was rejected within hours, accompanied by notification that their credit facilities would remain frozen until they accepted the full dignity framework. The message was clear: transformation was not negotiable. Legal departments across the industry worked frantically to draft policies that would satisfy Brooks Capital requirements while maintaining operational feasibility. The challenge involved creating binding commitments that could be enforced through financial mechanisms rather than traditional regulatory oversight. Disney Cruise Lines pioneered an innovative approach by establishing a customer dignity ombudsman position with authority to override operational decisions that violated respect protocols. The ombudsman reported directly to the board of directors and had access to real-time customer feedback systems. The training requirements represented another massive undertaking. Every customer-facing employee needed certification in bias recognition and dignified service delivery. The programs extended beyond traditional customer service training to include cultural competency, unconscious bias awareness, and conflict de-escalation techniques. MSC Cruises partnered with diversity consulting firm Harrison & Associates to develop comprehensive bias detection protocols. Their system analyzed customer service interactions for language patterns, response time variations, and treatment disparities that might indicate discriminatory behavior. The financial implications were staggering. Industry-wide implementation of dignity protocols required investment in new technology systems, extensive staff retraining, and ongoing monitoring infrastructure. Conservative estimates placed the total cost at over $2 billion across all participating companies. Yet the alternative was bankruptcy. Brooks Capital's funding freeze had demonstrated the existential vulnerability of companies dependent on concentrated investment sources. Compliance represented survival, regardless of cost. Princess Cruises took the most aggressive approach to transformation, implementing what they called the Monaco Protocols. Named directly after the incident that triggered the crisis, these standards exceeded Brooks Capital requirements and became the industry's most comprehensive dignity framework. The Monaco Protocols included passenger bill of rights, staff bias reporting systems, executive accountability measures, and financial penalties for dignity violations. Most importantly, they created passenger advocacy positions with authority to investigate complaints and recommend corrective actions. Regulatory bodies took notice of the industry's voluntary transformation. The Federal Maritime Commission announced plans to incorporate dignity standards into formal cruise line oversight, essentially making Brooks Capital requirements into legal obligations for all industry participants. International maritime organizations followed suit. The International Maritime Organization published guidelines encouraging adoption of dignity protocols across global shipping industries. The Monaco incident had created regulatory momentum that extended far beyond cruise tourism. Employment practices underwent radical revision as companies recognized that staff treatment directly affected customer service quality. Cruise lines began offering higher wages, improved working conditions, and advancement opportunities designed to create positive workplace cultures that would translate into better passenger experiences. The ripple effects extended to maritime education programs. Universities offering hospitality and maritime studies incorporated dignity training into their curricula. Future cruise industry professionals would graduate with competencies in bias recognition and respectful service delivery. Technology companies specializing in customer service analytics experienced unprecedented demand for bias detection software. Artificial intelligence systems capable of identifying discriminatory language patterns became essential tools for cruise line compliance monitoring. The transformation created new professional opportunities as well. Dignity compliance officers became high-demand positions across the maritime industry. These professionals specialized in developing, implementing, and monitoring respect protocols within complex organizational structures. International port authorities began requiring dignity certifications for vessels seeking harbor access. The standards that began with Brooks Capital requirements became prerequisites for global cruise operations. Labor unions representing cruise industry workers initially resisted the oversight requirements, fearing that increased monitoring would create hostile work environments. However, early implementation showed that dignity protocols actually improved working conditions by creating clear standards and reducing arbitrary management decisions. The transformation extended to vendor relations as well. Cruise lines required their suppliers, contractors, and service partners to adopt compatible dignity standards. The Monaco protocols became industry-wide requirements that affected thousands of businesses supporting cruise operations. Financial institutions took notice of the transformation's success in reducing operational risks. Banks began offering preferential lending rates to companies with certified dignity compliance programs, recognizing that respectful customer service reduced legal liability and reputational risks. Insurance companies followed suit, providing coverage discounts for cruise lines with comprehensive bias prevention systems. The business case for dignity had evolved beyond moral imperative into financial advantage.
The speed of transformation surprised industry analysts who had predicted months or years of resistance to Brooks Capital requirements. Instead, the existential threat created by fund freezes accelerated change that might otherwise have taken decades to implement. 6 months after the Monaco incident, industry compliance with dignity protocols approached 90% across major cruise lines. The transformation had become self-sustaining as companies discovered that respectful service delivery improved customer satisfaction, employee retention, and operational efficiency. The Monaco protocols were adapted by other luxury service industries facing similar challenges with discriminatory treatment. Hotels, airlines, and high-end retailers began implementing versions of the dignity frameworks pioneered by cruise companies under financial pressure. Brooks Capital announced plans to expand dignity requirements to other investment portfolios, creating industry-wide transformation that extended far beyond maritime transportation. The Monaco incident had established precedent for using economic leverage to drive social change across multiple business sectors. The institutional transformation was complete, but it represented only the beginning of broader changes that would reshape how luxury service industries approached customer dignity and respect. The woman who had been told she didn't belong had created new standards that would protect future customers from similar treatment. The cruise industry that emerged from the crisis bore little resemblance to the one that had existed before a harbor master made assumptions about who belonged in executive spaces. 18 months after the Monaco incident, Dr. Savannah Brooks stood before a different kind of audience. The ballroom at the Fairmont Monte Carlo was filled with cruise industry executives, maritime policy experts, and international business leaders who had gathered for what many considered the most important hospitality conference in decades. The same harbor where Trevor Hamilton had questioned her legitimacy now hosted vessels flying flags from companies that had undergone complete cultural transformation. The irony was not lost on anyone present, least of all Savannah herself. Her keynote address had been anticipated for months. Industry analysts expected her to detail the success of dignity protocols, celebrate the cultural changes her intervention had created, or announce expansion of her investment oversight to other sectors. What they received instead was something no one had predicted. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had characterized her response to discrimination 2 years earlier. "We have achieved something remarkable together. 38 cruise companies have implemented comprehensive dignity frameworks. Customer satisfaction ratings have reached historic highs. Employee retention has improved dramatically. The financial performance of transformed companies exceeds pre-crisis levels." The audience nodded appreciatively, expecting celebration of these achievements. Instead, Savannah's next words shifted the entire narrative.
Today, I announce the establishment of the Hamilton Maritime Scholarship Foundation, funded with $500 million from Brooks Capital. This foundation will provide educational opportunities for the children and families of maritime industry workers who lost employment during the transformation crisis, including the family of Trevor Hamilton. The ballroom fell silent. The collective intake of breath was audible as the audience processed the implications of her announcement. She was extending financial support to the very person whose discriminatory actions had triggered the industry crisis. The foundation will offer scholarships, vocational training, and career development programs for maritime industry families affected by the changes we implemented. Excellence in hospitality requires excellence in opportunity, and opportunity should not be limited by the mistakes of previous generations. The silence stretched as industry leaders struggled to understand the strategic logic behind supporting the families of those who had created the problem. The woman who had demonstrated the power to destroy careers and companies was now using that same power to rebuild them. The announcement reverberated through international business circles within hours. CNN Business led their evening coverage with analysis of what they termed an unprecedented corporate philanthropy strategy. Financial Times published a front-page editorial questioning whether Savannah's decision represented weakness or strategic brilliance. CNBC convened a panel of business ethicists and behavioral economists to examine the psychological implications of her choice. Dr. Rachel Martinez from Stanford Business School offered a perspective that would shape much of the subsequent analysis. What we're witnessing is the difference between transactional justice and transformational leadership, she explained to anchors struggling to categorize Savannah's decision. Transactional justice seeks equal harm for harm done. Transformational leadership seeks to prevent future harm by changing the underlying conditions that created the original problem. The debate that followed became one of the most watched business television segments of the year. Viewers called in with passionate opinions on both sides, creating a global conversation about the appropriate response to discrimination and the role of forgiveness in corporate accountability. Social media platforms exploded with competing interpretations of Savannah's announcement. The hashtag #GraceOrJustice trended globally within 6 hours, generating over 10 million posts in the first day. The debate revealed deep philosophical divisions about justice, redemption, and the use of economic power. Supporters of the decision framed it as the ultimate demonstration of strength. Twitter user @BusinessWisdom posted a thread that gained 2 million likes. She didn't just defeat her enemy, she transformed him into a stakeholder. That's not a weakness, that's the kind of power that changes the world permanently. Critics viewed the decision as betrayal of everyone who had faced similar discrimination. Activist organization Justice Forward published a statement questioning whether financial support for Hamilton's family sent the wrong message about consequences for prejudicial behavior. The complexity of reactions reflected broader cultural tensions about forgiveness, accountability, and the appropriate responses to systemic discrimination. University philosophy departments began incorporating the Hamilton Foundation decision into courses on ethics and justice theory. Trevor Hamilton himself had remained largely silent since his termination from Monaco Marina. His life had been upended by viral infamy, employment difficulties, and public recognition that made normal social interaction challenging. The discrimination incident had followed him through multiple job applications and social situations. His teenage daughter Emma had faced harassment at school and social isolation due to her father's actions. Teachers reported that she had become withdrawn and defensive, struggling with the burden of being associated with a viral symbol of workplace bias. The scholarship announcement created an impossible emotional situation for the Hamilton family. Accepting the support meant acknowledging dependency on the generosity of the woman Trevor had wronged. Rejecting it meant potentially limiting Emma's educational future for the sake of pride that had already cost their family tremendously.
Family discussion stretched over weeks as they grappled with the moral complexity of their situation. Trevor's wife Jennifer had lost her own employment when her employer decided to avoid association with the family's public controversy. The financial strain of supporting their household without two incomes made the scholarship offer both more necessary and more difficult to accept.
Emma Hamilton's response, posted on her personal social media account 3 weeks after the announcement, provided clarity that the family debates had lacked. "Dr. Brooks saw my father make a terrible mistake," she wrote. "She could have destroyed our family completely. Instead, she's giving me the chance to be better than his worst moment. I'm accepting the scholarship and I'm going to study international business so I can help create the kind of respectful world she's building." The post was shared millions of times within hours, becoming a symbol of how grace could break cycles of resentment and create unexpected alliances across social and economic divides. Emma's decision to publicly accept responsibility for her father's actions while embracing the opportunity for redemption resonated with audiences struggling to understand the complex emotions involved. International business schools began studying the Hamilton Foundation as an example of strategic philanthropy that addressed both social justice and economic development. Harvard Business School published a comprehensive case study examining how Savannah had transformed potential enemies into stakeholders in her broader vision for industry transformation. The case study became required reading in leadership programs worldwide, generating academic research into the intersection of economic power and social change. Students analyzed the decision from multiple perspectives: game theory, behavioral economics, corporate social responsibility, and ethical leadership. The foundation's impact extended far beyond individual scholarships. Maritime industry companies began contributing to the program, recognizing that investing in employee family education created long-term benefits for their organizations. The initiative became a model for corporate social responsibility that addressed both historical harm and future opportunity creation. Within the first year, the Hamilton Maritime Scholarship Foundation received applications from over 5,000 maritime industry families. The program expanded beyond basic education to include vocational training, entrepreneurial support, and career mentoring. Emma Hamilton became the foundation's first intern, working directly with families affected by the industry transformation. Trevor Hamilton's first public statement since the Monaco incident came 6 months after the foundation's establishment. In a written statement released through his attorney, he expressed gratitude for his daughter's opportunities while acknowledging the complexity of accepting help from someone he had wronged. "Dr. Brooks has demonstrated a level of grace that I failed to show," his statement read. "My actions reflected prejudices that I am working to understand and overcome. My daughter's future is brighter because Dr. Brooks chose education over retribution. I am committed to spending the rest of my career ensuring that no other family faces what mine has experienced." The statement sparked renewed debate about redemption, accountability, and the appropriate responses to discriminatory behavior. Some viewed Hamilton's acknowledgement as insufficient given the scale of damage his actions had created. Others praised his willingness to accept responsibility and work toward personal growth. Religious organizations across multiple faiths embraced the Hamilton Foundation as an example of practical forgiveness that created positive change rather than simply overlooking harmful behavior. Sermons and religious writings examined the difference between enabling harmful conduct and transforming it through strategic grace. The cruise industry continued its transformation, with dignity protocols becoming standard practice across maritime tourism. Customer satisfaction surveys showed that passengers felt more respected and valued, leading to increased loyalty and positive word-of-mouth marketing that exceeded traditional advertising effectiveness. The financial benefits of respectful service delivery became undeniable. Companies with comprehensive dignity frameworks outperformed competitors in profitability, customer retention, and employee satisfaction. Stock prices for firms with certified dignity protocols consistently exceeded market averages, creating investor demand for ethical business practices.
Insurance companies began offering premium discounts for cruise lines with comprehensive bias prevention systems, recognizing that respectful customer service reduced legal liability and reputational risks. The business case for respect had evolved from moral imperative to competitive advantage, with measurable financial benefits. 3 years after Monaco, Savannah's approach influenced other industries facing similar challenges. Technology companies adopted dignity protocols for user interactions, reducing harassment and improving platform experiences. Financial services implemented respect frameworks for customer relationships, leading to higher satisfaction scores and reduced complaint volumes. Retail organizations established bias prevention systems for shopping experiences, training staff to provide equal service regardless of customer appearance or perceived economic status. The protocols developed for cruise lines proved adaptable across various service industries facing discrimination challenges. The Monaco incident had become a business school case study taught in leadership programs worldwide. Students analyzed Savannah's strategic use of economic leverage, her patience in allowing consequences to unfold naturally, and her unexpected decision to support those who had opposed her. The case studies revealed multiple leadership lessons beyond the obvious points about discrimination and accountability. Strategic patience, the power of silence, and the long-term thinking required for sustainable change became central themes in executive education programs. 5 years after Monaco, the Hamilton Maritime Scholarship Foundation graduated its first class of recipients, including Emma Hamilton, who had completed her international business degree with highest honors. Her thesis titled Economic Leverage and Social Justice, Lessons from the Monaco Transformation became required reading in several business ethics programs. Emma's career path led her to Brooks Capital, where she joined the team responsible for evaluating dignity compliance across investment portfolios. The irony of Trevor Hamilton's daughter working for the woman he had discriminated against was not lost on industry observers, but it represented the kind of transformational relationship that Savannah had envisioned. The professional relationship between Emma and Savannah became a symbol of how individual growth could emerge from institutional failure. Emma's unique perspective as both victim and beneficiary of the Monaco incident provided valuable insights for improving dignity protocols across different industries.
The legacy extended beyond individual stories to systemic change in how economic power intersected with social responsibility. Investors across various sectors began incorporating dignity metrics into their decision-making processes, recognizing that respectful business practices created sustainable competitive advantages. The Monaco protocols were adopted by international business organizations as voluntary standards for customer service excellence. What began as crisis management had evolved into industry best practices that improved operations while advancing social justice objectives. Academic research into the Monaco incident revealed broader patterns about the relationship between economic leverage and social change. Economists documented how concentrated investment decisions could create rapid cultural transformation when traditional regulatory approaches had failed to produce meaningful results. The story continued to generate discussion about proportionality, justice, and redemption years after the original incident. Philosophy departments used the case to explore questions about forgiveness, power, and moral responsibility in complex social systems where individual actions affected thousands of people. International conferences on business ethics regularly featured panels examining the Monaco case and its implications for corporate social responsibility. The incident had created new frameworks for understanding how individual dignity connected to systemic change and economic justice. Savannah's approach had created a new model for addressing discrimination that went beyond punishment to include prevention, education, and opportunity creation. The woman who had been told she didn't belong had used her response to create spaces where everyone could belong with dignity and respect. The harbor master who had questioned her legitimacy had inadvertently triggered changes that made the maritime industry more respectful, more profitable, and more sustainable. His daughter's success through the scholarship program demonstrated that grace could transform enemies into allies and mistakes into opportunities for growth. The Monaco incident remained a landmark example of how individual dignity, economic power, and strategic vision could combine to create lasting social change. The transformation continued to ripple outward, affecting industries and individuals far beyond the luxury yacht harbor where it began. The legacy was not just about one woman's response to discrimination, but about how societies could choose grace over revenge, while still demanding accountability and change. The story proved that true power lies not in destruction, but in the ability to build something better from the wreckage of what came before.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.